On July 2, 1943, above the dusty Castelvetrono airfield in Sicily, history was rewritten in a moment so brief that the German pilot who fell victim to it never even saw it coming. A Faulkner FW-190, one of the Luftwaffe's proudest machines, was diving confidently when suddenly streams of .50 caliber rounds shredded through its fuselage, flames erupting as the aircraft spiraled helplessly into the Sicilian countryside below. And the man responsible for this kill was not who the Nazi High Command, or even much of the United States Army Air Forces, ever believed capable of such a feat. First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old black pilot from Brazil, Indiana, flying his P-40L Warhawk, had just achieved the first confirmed aerial victory for the Tuskegee Airmen, and in doing so, he cracked the foundations of two oppressive ideologies at once: Germany's toxic doctrine of racial superiority and America's own entrenched system of segregation that doubted black men could master machines, lead in combat, or display courage under fire. That single swastika painted on Hall's Warhawk that afternoon would become the first of 112 enemy aircraft ultimately destroyed by the Tuskegee Airmen, the very men German pilots, astonished by their skill, would later call the Schwarz-Vogelmännchen, the Black Birdmen, a grudging respect wrapped in racist vocabulary, but respect nonetheless. For the Nazis, whose laws banned interracial marriage and classified black people as untermensch, subhuman, incapable of intellect or valor, it was an ideological disaster to see their prize fighters bested by men they believed nature had consigned to inferiority. And yet in the skies over Europe, reality made a mockery of their propaganda. What those Luftwaffe pilots did not realize in 1943 was that they were not squaring off against an experiment doomed to fail, as some American commanders had privately hoped, but against one of the most rigorously trained, highly motivated, and tightly disciplined groups of aviators the U.S. Army Air Forces had ever produced. These men had endured prejudice before ever facing an enemy aircraft, trained longer and harder than most of their white counterparts, and carried into every sortie not only the burden of national duty, but also the crushing weight of proving that millions of African Americans, denied dignity at home, were capable of the highest levels of courage and skill in the ultimate test of war. To appreciate how monumental Hall's kill was, one must understand the poisonous climate these men came from. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College had issued a report coldly concluding that black soldiers were of inferior mentality, weak in character, and unfit for leadership, a statement that calcified into policy, shutting black Americans out of combat aviation and branding them unworthy of technical or commanding roles. Yet history has a way of elevating the determined few, and years before America would open its cockpit doors, pioneers like Eugene Bullard, who flew for France in World War I because the U.S. barred him, and Bessie Coleman, who earned her pilot's license in France in 1921 when American schools excluded her, were already proving the bigots wrong. By the 1930s, civilian institutions like the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago had trained dozens of black aviators, showing that skill behind the stick knew no racial boundary. As the storm clouds of another world war gathered, civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, Labor Titan A, Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie relentlessly pressured the Roosevelt administration, while black newspapers like the Pittsburgh Courier hammered home the hypocrisy of fighting for democracy abroad while denying at home. Under this pressure, Public Law 18 passed in 1939, mandating black inclusion in civilian pilot programs, and by 1941 the War Department announced the formation of the 99 Pursuit Squadron, an all-black combat unit that many white officers smugly dubbed an experiment. But for Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., who had endured 4 years of icy silence at West Point where white cadets refused to speak to him outside official duty, this was no experiment. It was destiny. He and the first 26 Tuskegee pilots deployed to North Africa in 1943, only to find their commanding officer, Colonel William Omeyer, deeply skeptical, relegating them to dull patrols far from the main action. Critics sharpened their knives, waiting for failure. But then came Pantelleria on June 2, 1943, their first mission, and though no aircraft were lost or downed, the Tuskegee pilots showed discipline under sudden German attack, refusing to break formation. Then a month later, Charles Hall's kill silenced jeers and ignited pride, not only among the black ground crews who had endured ridicule from white personnel, but among 13 million African Americans back home desperate for vindication. Yet, prejudice was stubborn. By January 1944, Colonel Momeyer filed a devastating report accusing the 99th of lacking aggressiveness, urging their removal. General Hap Arnold considered shutting them down until Anzio. On January 27, 1944, 15 Tuskegee pilots flying obsolete P-40s faced waves of superior German fighters over the Anzio beachhead, and in 2 days of furious combat, they shot down as many as 13 enemy aircraft, including 2 more by Charles Hall himself. In one stroke, they demolished Momeyer's argument, and subsequent War Department studies proved their performance equaled or exceeded white units. Their reputation sealed, the 332nd Fighter Group was formed, combining the 99th with new squadrons, and soon they transitioned to long-range bomber escort duties that would make them legends. Colonel Davis drilled into his men a single doctrine: stay with the bombers. Our job is not to be aces. It is to bring those bombers home. That discipline became their hallmark. In June 1944, their P-51 Mustangs were painted with bright red tails, and soon bomber crews across Italy and Germany whispered, if you could choose your escort, request the red tails, because they never left you. The Tuskegee Airmen flew with a stubborn loyalty bomber, Cruz would later call Angelic. July 18, 1944, tested that creed when 66 Mustangs escorted bombers into Germany and found themselves against nearly 100 Luftwaffe fighters. The sky turned into a cauldron of smoke, fire, and tracers. 15 American bombers were lost, 3 Tuskegee pilots killed, yet the Red Tails' refusal to abandon formation prevented an outright massacre. Their valor grew legendary, even as critics back home tried to minimize them. And then in March 1945, they faced the Luftwaffe's trump card, the Me-262 jet fighter, faster than any Allied plane. On March 24th, during a 1,600-mile mission to Berlin, Tuskegee pilots Roscoe Brown Erlane and Charles Brantley did the unthinkable, shooting down 3 Me-262s in one day, more than many groups managed all war. For that, the 332nd earned a Distinguished Unit Citation. Still, the cost was heavy. 66 pilots killed, 32 captured. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson, shot down in 1944, recalled a chilling moment when his German interrogator recited details of his family in Detroit, proof of the Reich's terrifying intelligence network. Yet even in POW camps, Jefferson noted, he was treated more equally by white American officers than in his own segregated country. This irony stung. He fought for democracy abroad only to return to Jim Crow at home. But among bomber crews, race dissolved in gratitude. They knew the Red Tails as their angels, men who would waggle their wings in greeting, who flew impossibly tight formations, who refused to abandon crippled planes. Their statistics told the story. Only 27 bombers lost under their watch, versus an average of 46 with other groups. They flew over 1,500 missions, destroyed 112 enemy planes in the air, 150 on the ground, wrecked hundreds of trains, vehicles, and even an Italian destroyer. They earned 96 Distinguished Flying Crosses, 744 Air Medals, 14 Bronze Stars, and 3 Distinguished Unit Citations. These weren't the numbers of an experiment. They were the ledger of an elite. Behind every pilot were thousands of ground crew, 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen in total, fewer than 1,000 of them pilots, the rest mechanics, armorers, clerks, men who often lacked parts or supplies, yet kept planes flying at readiness rates rivaling or surpassing white units. Ramitelli Airfield was primitive, yet they made it work, even under bombing raids that killed comrades. They knew that every B-17 they protected carried 10 lives and $238,000 of American investment. Every mission mattered, and Colonel Davis constantly reminded them, it takes discipline to stay with the bombers when the enemy tempts you to chase. Their story was not just combat but contradiction. Their heroism abroad contrasted with neglect at home. Black newspapers celebrated them. Mainstream press often ignored them. Nazi pilots grudgingly acknowledged the Schwartz-Vogel mention, while many Americans denied their existence. It took President Truman's 1948 executive order integrating the armed forces, influenced directly by their record, to begin correcting the injustice. Davis himself became the first black general in the U.S. Air Force in 1954. But for decades their feats were forgotten, many pilots living quiet lives, their stories dismissed. Only in 2007 did the nation officially honor them with the Congressional Gold Medal when President George W. Bush told the surviving few, "We are better off because of your courage." By then, most had passed away, but the truth had outlived the prejudice. In cold numbers, 112 kills, 3 jets downed, 27 bombers lost versus 46 average. The Tuskegee Airmen had dismantled both Nazi ideology and American segregation's lie. As Roscoe Brown, who downed a jet over Berlin, later said, "We didn't just fight the Germans. We fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred, and we won all 3 battles." Their red tails, once mocked, became symbols of pride. They were no experiment. They were warriors who soared, proving to Allies, enemies, and their own country that ability is never bound by color. In their contrails stretched the arc of justice, and in their victories echoed the truth. Courage knows no race.